Doing a test. Am I audible? Am I audible? Doing a few checks.
Yeah. Can you hear me now as well? Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Sir, yes. All right. I'm not able to view the entire full screen. Yeah. Yeah. Can you hear me now as well? I hope.
Yeah, loud and clear.
Loud and clear. Lovely. Lovely. Shall we begin?
Yeah,
All
let's
right.
get
All right.
started.
Must say that you're looking very, very sharp with your entire setup there. Yeah.
Thanks.
I think I'll have to, invest a little bit and move away from my switchboards.
That's just comfortable as well. The thing you have there.
Lovely. So, for everybody who's going to be new here and joining us for the first time, this is AOH, After Office Hours Community. This is where we discuss all things design. And today we are joined by the lovely Rahul Mulla, who's going to talk to us about Rive, who's going to tell us about animations, going to tell us about how we can bring an entire movement into just static designs that we currently do. And Rahul, I remember reading this somewhere, uh, that movement has meaning. And I feel like that was something which really, really inspired me to pick up a little bit of motion and make sure that I integrate a little bit of that into any visual, any static that I design. So, on the similar lines, is there some particular saying or something that you find really inspirational when it comes to picking up motion and doing motion?
Motion, like it's all about the spice. If you talk about it in food, like without spice, the food doesn't taste good.
Hmm.
Similarly, if we have motion, then there is no like need to worry about how it's gonna look and turn
Hmm.
out. If you add motion, it's just gonna liven up the things. It's about like as you're talking about a quote, I really
Hmm.
like how a guy mentioned this in an event as well. Like when you have cars, when you close the door, there is
Hmm.
like a thump sound that comes when you close it.
Yeah.
It's actually engineered to be that. It's not
Oh,
there by default.
okay.
So that's it's all about that satisfying feeling which
Yeah.
comes with these little things, and that's what we do with animation.
Absolutely. It just packages every small thing that you've worked on, and it really helps bring everything to life. And I really am very intrigued about, your entire story. How did you pick up animation, or how did you decide on this path in the first place? I'd love to know more about that.
I am basically a programming instructor. I teach courses on Udemy and other platforms about Python programming. In my free times, when I work on personal projects, I feel the need of animation and things in my websites and apps.
Hmm.
So I came across Rive. It was in its early stages, and when I picked it up, it was just a all-in-one solution for a developer like me. I
Hmm.
had to learn a bit of animation, but
Hmm.
that was easy because I had some experience beforehand. And when I did, it just worked very good. And
Hmm.
from there, it just took off. I use Rive for my personal projects, some client works, and also I'm using it till now and teaching it to other people's as well.
Lovely. So, when you say you're teaching it to other people, could you elaborate on that a little bit?
So I have recently launched a online course that focuses on Rive and the interactivity thing for
Okay.
complete beginners. So if someone is coming from a design background, they know nothing about animation or interactive animation at that matter, they can get started with Ripe, what
Hmm.
is interface, how to navigate around, then slowly build their way up and
Hmm.
learn how to create basic animations.
Hmm.
And next comes the fun part where they
Hmm.
learn how to add interactivity to all of these things.
Lovely. And from what I dabble a little bit into animation myself, and from what I currently do, there's a lot of lottie that takes place. You have to design a state for each and every. For example, if you're talking about a button, there's going to be a specific way that a disabled button would look as compared to how it would look on hover, and how it's going to look when it's clicked. So there's a lot of state management that goes on. So how does Rive sets it apart from other animation platforms in that respect? How does that state management look like?
Rive actually streamlines the process for the animator as well as the developer. That
All
is,
right.
if both of them have a state decided, like we will have a button, there
Hmm.
will be two states, which is there would be a loading state and there would be a finished state. Instead of creating separate animations, in
Hmm.
Rive, the animator can simply have it as animation timelines, like
Hmm.
simple play animations, and then set it up in the state machine
Okay.
as when the loading is playing, they can have a trigger
Hmm.
that can be used by the developer as a simple trigger fire, and then
Hmm.
from the loading, the button goes to the finished animation. And that's what it really takes to create a animation like that.
Lovely, lovely. And as we are talking about this, what are all the things that you're going to cover in today's call so that all of us have an idea of what we're going to learn?
Today, as we have the name of the session, we are taking into the future of motion design with Rive. We will learn what Rive is, what it can offer, what people are using it for, and then we'll also see how to build a button just like that, which we talked about. That
Hmm.
is, we'll have a button, we will have a loading state, and we'll
Interesting.
have a finished state, which will be all created in Rive from scratch, and then we'll answer some questions our fellow viewers have.
I think I have a little bit of could you speak a little louder? Maybe it's me too. Maybe let's just try and see if that works.
Does it sound better
Yeah,
now?
yeah. I think it sounds a lot better.
Okay, I'll just turn up the volume, which should
Hmm.
do it.
Yeah.
Thanks for the heads up.
Yeah, no problem, no problem. All right. Okay, so I think all of us here at AOH, we are very excited to start this session with you. So let's get into it.
All right, I
Sure.
will go ahead and take it from here.
Lovely,
Thanks
lovely.
for all the introduction. So let's get started.
Yes.
I'll ask the audience about whether or not my screen is visible. You can see the infinity mirror, which means the screen is visible. So Rive is a tool that allows you to create interactive animations and ship them to various runtimes. And I think you would have heard this line as well multiple times. But what it means is that Rive is a tool where you create animations just like any other software. If you're coming from Figma prototypes or After Effects, you will know what animation is and how that works. But even if you have not done animations before, it's totally fine. Rive plays a role in product design or product development. That is, you can create animations for your products, that is, webs or apps, and then you can ship them to those products. That is, here you can see in the Rive's landing page, we have some use cases. That is, Rive is used for automotives, that is, in the smart screens, panels, for product UIs, as I mentioned, game UIs, games itself. You can create full on games which will look as well. Then you can also integrate them into websites, mobile apps, film and TVs, and broadcasts as well, because all of this is interactive. Now let's look at some of these implementation or use cases of Rive, starting with the 2D Advanced Studios. I really love this one, so this had to be the first. When I click on this Enter Advanced Studios button, you can already see the kind of interaction we have here. There is sound effects, there is things like this, which doesn't make you feel like this is a website. This goes to show how much you can build with Rive. And all of this is done with Rive. And you can see that here as well. That is 2D Advanced powered by Rive. That's awesome. Now let's look at another side of the coin. That is character animations like this. Duolingo is one of the first companies that have integrated Rive into their workflow. That is for their animations. That is, we have characters, all of them built in Rive for the Duolingo app. They have lip sync, they have interactive states, and so much done with Rive's state machine. And as I go through, you can see some of those examples. So that's character animation, which is also possible in Rive, and not only possible, you can go a very long way with the same. And finally, as I mentioned, you can create full on game UIs or games in Rive as well. And I personally wanted to create something as well. And here's my take on that. I've created a simple cricket game where you can go ahead and play cricket. We have a batsman and a bowler, and when I click, I swing the bat and the ball goes on. Now I have to time it perfectly to get a sixer like this. And if I just don't hit when the ball is around, then I will get bowled. Let's try that out. So I'll go ahead and swing and I get bowled. Now this is a fully functional game working in Rive. You can get 3 type of shots, you can hit 6 hits, and then you win the game to terminate the same. So this just goes to show what Rive can do and what you can build with the same. Now, for all the people who are here to learn something about Rive and how to use that in their workflows as well, we will get started with Rive and build a new button that would be this right here. We have a button like this, which you must have seen in a lot of user interfaces. We can go and hover over the same. It has a hover state, that is hover animations, nothing new. But when I click on the same, we get a loading animation like this. And then we have the developer signal when to end this loop, that is the loading phase. To do that, I can use inputs. I can go ahead and trigger the payment done input, and it will go ahead and show the success animation and go back to the idle state. And this can go on and on forever. Let's go ahead and build the same. Starting from scratch, I'll go ahead and open Rive. Now the interface might look different depending on if you're on a paid account or a free account, but it's fine. Even if you are on a free plan, there will be no limitations to follow along. So you log in to Rive like any other application, and then you can go ahead and create a new file, which is in the top right corner, this new file right here. I'll click on the same, and then it will create a new file. Let's go ahead and maximize this screen right here. So I'll go ahead and maximize the same. But before that, let's take a look at the button designs. First of all, I'll name this file. You can see here we have tabs as files. So this is the one which we just previewed, and this is the one which we just created. Its name is untitled. So let's give it a name. To do that, you simply go ahead and double click on the name and give it a name. Let's say our button. Now to get started, we'll go ahead and create a artboard. Now if you're coming from Figma or any other design software, you will know about the terminology of artboards, canvases, or simple containers. In Rive, we have artboards, which are essentially bounding boxes for our contents, and we can add any kind of shapes. So just for demonstration, I'll go ahead and add some shapes to the same, and these are part of this artboard. So if I move this artboard around, this is part of the same. And similarly, you can create multiple artboards with different artboards, that is artworks, and their associated animations. So let's go ahead and see about or go through the basics of the Rive interface and how to navigate around the same. Here we have the file explorer that we were before. This is right here. Then if we click on a file, that is double click to open the same, we get into the actual Rive's file editor. Now here we have a top bar where we have all the tools, And then we have a hierarchy, that is all the layers and so on. And in the middle, we have the stage where we can have all of our artwork and so on. And on the right, we have our inspector. Now let's take a look at them one by one. The toolbar has all the sets of tools you will ever need. And in this session, we won't cover each one because it will take a lot of time to go over each one by one. We'll just select the tool which we need and then I'll explain about that. In the left, we have the Explorer. So you can see we have this artboard. When I select the same, it is also highlighted in the hierarchy, that is the layers panel, if you're familiar with the same. So if I create a shape inside the artboard, that also pops up inside the hierarchy. And if I select the same, this is right here. And now when I select this, you will notice how the right panel changes as well. So if I go ahead and click somewhere else, you can see the inspector panel shows something else, that is some basic options to set the design or the animate background, which for now is just fine. So I can go ahead and select the rectangle again, either from the hierarchy, that is the layers, or selecting the element itself like this. And then you can see we have these kind of options. If you're coming from any design software, you will know this thing, that is you have the elements properties on the right side. The same is the case with Rive. We have its position, its scale, its rotation, and all the other properties that are also new to Rive. For this one, we won't go one by one into the deep of each feature as well. Again, that will take a lot of time. But let's go over the basics so that you can navigate around. If I zoom over to there, that is the right panel, you can see we have the position parameters. That is, we can control the transform of the element. We can either scale it up or down as well. And then we can also control its rotation. Next, we have some special parameters for this rectangle right here. That is the procedural shape. We can set a width, a height, the origin as well, which would be the anchor point in this case, and basic corner radius for those smooth corners. Now, as I mentioned, we won't go into detail for each and every feature because that will make this session too long, but instead, we'll just go ahead and learn about the things we need to make our interactive animation with this button design right here. I'm going to use these designs which I have created previously in Figma, and I'm going to go ahead and add animations to the same. So the idea is we have a Pay Now button like this, which has an icon and a text, and then we have a finished state, that is this right here, a tick mark and the paid label. In between, we need a loading animation, which will do with this dollar circle icon, that it will go to the middle and keep spinning, which will do in Rive. So now we need to export or import this into Rive. That is pretty easy when it comes to Figma. So if I go ahead and select this artwork or any other thing, you can go ahead and right click on the same, and then you can see an option to copy paste as SVG. So we can go ahead and simply copy paste this as SVG like this, and you will get a message for the same as well. And then if you go over to Rive and just do Control V or Command V if you're on a Mac, you will get that pasted in the assets panel. You can see we have hierarchy and assets. If I go over to assets, we can see a pasted SVG. Let's go ahead and drag and drop that to the artboard like this. And you can see we have the Pay Now buttons artboard, that is the artwork. Let's delete this rectangle and place this in the center. using the alignment options. Now with our button, we need another state as well, that is this paid setting or the paid icon and the text. So I'll go ahead and do the same thing as before. That is, I'll select the button, copy paste as SVG, and then go to Rive and paste it here. In the assets panel, I'll have the same available. Now you can see this is just like before, so I might have to do that again. So again, I will select it, copy as SVG, make sure the message comes up, paste that back in, and we have got that here. I'll go ahead and place this beneath the Pay Now button and get started. So for our Pay Now button, what we have to do is process the same or prepare the same before the animation, and that in this case will be removing the group which we have already there. You can see we have a anchor point at the top which can be used to move the same. So I'll go ahead and remove the same. To do that, I can either select all the elements and put them outside the group, or what I can do is select the group and hit a shortcut on my keyboard. That will be Control Shift G, and we have got something like this. Now what I need to do is align all of this together and rename the artwork. Now to make things easier, I will have this invisible, the paid label, that is, for now. We have this text, we have this icon, we have the rectangle, and we have this clip thing which is invisible. You can see it is just a gizmo, or a clip, you can see, which is clipping the icon. So that's something that was configured in Figma. We don't need in Rive, so we will delete the same. So we have three things. We have the text, we have the icon, and we have the container. Now what we need to do is put them in a group again, because that would be easy for our animation process. To do that, I can just press Command or Control G like this and create a group. And then I can go ahead and select both of them, that is the icon and the text, and group them as well. Again, to group objects, I can hit Control and G. So this is the button's content and this is the button itself. I'll go ahead and name the same. That is, this is the button and this is the button content. Now why I did the same is because later on we'll go ahead and move this out of the view like this for the animation, and then we'll have it clipped. To do that, I can simply go ahead and select the button content layer, as you can see here in the hierarchy, and then I can go ahead and go into the inspector panel and add a clip. You can see clip right here. I can add one and then select this rectangle shape. So if I zoom out, you can see we have this pick a shape to use as a clipping source message. I can go ahead and use this container. Now select that from the hierarchy. That way you're sure this is used as a clipping source. And now we have this clipping uplight. So if I select the button content and get this out of the button, it is clipped like that. So that's how we do clipping in Rive. Next, we need to go ahead and set up the icon for the animation. So how our animation work for the icon is we'll have it transferred to the center. That is, it will animate to the center. And for now, I will just hide the text get this in the center like this. So it will animate to the center, it will scale up, and then it will rotate. Now we want the rotation to look 3D, and for that we'll simply rotate its x value. That is, if I go ahead and set a scale on the icon group, you can see we have our icon group. Inside that we have custom shapes. So I can go ahead and select the icon group, increase its size, and then I can group the path layers itself like this, and then I can go ahead and affect the scale x value. That is, if I go ahead and do it like this, you can see it gets this effect. If I go ahead and put it close together, zoom on the same, notice how this works. So as we go down from 100 to 0, we get a complete rotation. So we'll use the value to do that rotation effect. And another thing you should notice here is that when it is very small, it looks like it is squished, but we want more of a 3D effect. For that, we'll go ahead and simply select the icon that is this shape layers. You can see we have shape layers and we have the group which we just created. So I'll go ahead and select this shape layers, and in the strokes property, which is already applied in the stroke settings, I'll go ahead and uncheck apply transform. So apply transform just goes ahead and applies the transforms, in this case the scale, and gives that squished look. But if I go ahead and uncheck the same, notice how it looks now. It looks more of a 3D rotation than a simple scale change. So let's go ahead and apply the same and set it back to 100 for now, and also put it back to its original position. To do that, I'll just hit Ctrl and Z on my keyboard until we get it back to its original state. Now because this is live, we can't have that cut, so you had to see that all. Okay, so we have gone over the basics of how we are gonna have the animation working. Now we can go ahead and add the last cue to the design, that is the paid state. Same thing for the same. I will ungroup the artwork, and in this case remove the rectangle, that is this one right here. Create a group out of these two and rename the same as well. That is, we have the success label, we have the success text which is paid, and then we have the tick icon. I'm naming the layers because it will be easier later on to refer to the same and make the changes. That's a very good thing which you should make a habit of. So now I can put this inside this button content, which already has the clipping applied. So I can go ahead and put this success label inside the button content like this, and then we have two controls of the two labels. And let's make a group for the default label and icon as well, like this, and call this the default label, whatever. And then we can go ahead and preview how the same is gonna look. So we'll have the success label out of the view like ideally, and if I go ahead and apply the clipping to both of them, that is to the paid label as well. So clip, select the shape, and now it is clipped. So we have this right here, and when I get this out of the view, you can see it is not visible. And then we have the default view or the default label visible. When I go ahead and move that out of the view, it gets clipped as well. So when it is out of the view, we can have the success label shown in the center and just give off a message that it's success, get this out of the view, and have this back in. So that's the design part of the things or the preparation of our button. Now let's go ahead and animate the same. To animate in Rive, we go to a special animate mode, and the only thing that will be added to this interface or this mix would be the animations panel, you can see, which popped in the bottom. To go to the animate mode, we use this tab right here, that is from design to animate, and there is a keyboard shortcut for the same as well. You can hit tab on your keyboard to switch between the two. In the animate mode, we have state machines and timelines. Timelines are simple timeline animations, which is like a playhead going from 0% to 100%. That is something like this. Now, let's go over the things which we will create. So referring back to our finished example, we have one animation that is hover. You can see hover in, hover out. So that's the animation. Then we have a click animation. So when we click on the same, it goes to the loading state. So that's second. And when I go ahead and signal the payment is done, it goes ahead and shows the success animation. So we have to create 3 animations inside of our button. Let's go ahead and create them one by one. The first animation is having this icon right here, that is our dollar icon. Let's rename the same because we have 2 icons. We will go ahead and simply animate it, that is it will grow and again go back to its original state when there is a hover and hover out. To animate in Rive, we use keyframes. That is, let's say I want to animate this icon's skate. To do that, we'll use keyframes, which is in the inspector. Now notice carefully, that is when I go ahead and switch from design to animate mode, you will notice we have these diamonds beside the values, that is the position, the scale, and the rotation. And if I go ahead and say move this around, you will notice these diamonds for the position are changed into blue diamonds. That is keyframes. To give a very basic overview of the same, we have one state, in this case that is in this position, that is the default. I can go ahead and move it out of the view. So that's one keyframe or one state. Then I can move a bit into the timeline because we want animation. So let's say after 1 second, we want this thing back into the view. So I can simply move it back down. Notice we have these 2 dots inside of the timeline, that is this one and this one right here. And I can expand this as well. And you can see we have the dollar icon. We are affecting its position, that is the Y value. So it is changing from -47 to 0 or out of the view to into the view. And to view the animation, I can simply go ahead and hit the play icon and it will play the icon. And that's how we create animations in Rive. We simply key in the properties at specific states which we want. So at the starting, we want it out of the view, and then later on, we want it in the view. And we have got ourselves the animation like this. So let's remove the same. So I can make a selection and hit delete, because in this case, we want a growing animation for the hover state. So let's go ahead and give it a name as well. And just like the files, I can go ahead and double click on the timeline's name and give it a name. In this case, let's say hover like this, and then zoom out, select the icon, the dollar icon, and key in its current scale value. So instead of moving it around, I just want to key in or save its current state. To do that, I'll go over to the inspector and click on the diamond beside the scale. In this case, I want the scale to be 100. So I can just click on this. You can see it turns to a blue diamond, which means we have added a keyframe to the timeline like this. And this is why I stressed about naming the layers. So you can see inside of the dollar icon, we have this keyed in, the 100% scale at the start of our animation. Now what we want is it to grow when we hover over the button. To do that, I can simply move the timeline ahead and then set it to, let's say, 125. So I can just put that in, and you can see it is scaled in the y-axis, that is vertically, but I just want a uniform scale, that is 125 for both of the values in x and y. To do that, I can simply link both of them by hitting this link icon. So first I will undo like this, link both of them, and now if I enter 125, the same is applied to both directions. So that's a quick tip, or actually a thing which is in all of the design softwares. So we have got a very basic growing animations. Now we just don't want this to grow in this animation, but this to be linked with hover. For the same, I will create two different timelines. So in the animations panel here, I'll select this one, right click on the same and click duplicate. So I have two, which is hover and hover 2. I'll name the hover 2 as idle and hover as hover. So we'll go ahead and keep this keyframe in the idle one, that is the basic scale, which is 100%, and then remove the other one like this. And for the hover one, I'll remove the default one and only keep the 125% keyframe of the scale value, and also maybe put this at the start. So when I switch over the both, you can see we get this, and in the state machine we can add a transition in between. So that's the first animation. Let's ramp up and create the next animation, which is animating the loading. So let's preview the same again so that we have an idea. So we have this loading animation where the icon or this dollar icon is rotating, and we are doing that with the scale value. So let's do the same. I will go ahead and select the dollar icon, key in its scale, but for that we will need to create a new timeline. To create a new timeline, click on the plus button, add a timeline, and in the timeline, let's name it loop or loading, whichever you prefer, and then we can go ahead and start a new animation. For the same, I'll be using this dollar icon and all of these shapes. Now because we are going to change the dollar icon group's value, we should create another group for different set of animations, and that is something you should do as well, not to add all the animations to a single layer, so that in the state machine every layer has its own animation playing separately. So I'll go ahead and go back to the design mode, select the icon and group all of them again like this. I basically forgot the same, or maybe when I undoed all the actions, it got undo as well. So we have the icon inside the same. Let's get back to the icon animation. So I'll go ahead and select the dollar icon, that is the parent layer. We'll go ahead and change its position. So we're going to go ahead and move it to the center. But before that, we want this text out of the view. We can simply do that by moving it down like this. So from the idle to loading, you can see the label needs to go down. And that's why in the idle state, just like what we did with the hover, so we have a keyframe for its default state in the idle animation. And in the hover, we have the keyframe for the scale as bigger, that is 125. Similarly, in the loading, we are going to animate the text down and have its keyframe for the position as this right here. And in the idle, I'll just keyframe its default position, that is this right here. So it's going to animate in the state transitions, that is from the default state to the down state or the down position. Now we will focus on the icon and get it in the center. Instead of eyeballing the same, I'll just use the alignment options and put it in the center, just like that. And then we'll go ahead and scale it up as well, because this needs to fill the view for our button and also make it visible or prominent. So I'll go ahead and set its scale value to, let's say, 200%. That looks fine. And now I can go ahead and start the animation. That is something that we will play back right now. So I'll go ahead and select the inner icon group, which we created just now. And in the inspector, you can see we have the scale. Right now it is linked, but in this case, we don't want that linked because we want to only get something like this. So it did undo all of the actions. That is, the icons stroke should not have the transforms applied, which we did, but was lost in the undo action. No worries, we have that fixed. Now I can go ahead and select the icon group. In the inspector, key in the scale, that is by default the case, 100, go to the end and then set it to something like -100. So it will flip like this. And if I move the playhead in between, you can see we get a animation like this. Now what we'll do is make this a loop. That is, it should go ahead and loop this animation for indefinite amount of time until we stop the same. To do that, we'll go to the animation mode. That is, in the animations panel, we can add animations, and here is where we perform the actual animation by adding the keyframes. Above the same, you will notice some tools or icons which we can use to influence the animation and the view of the timeline, which is these right here. To do that, I can simply go over this icon right here where it says one shot. So one shot means the animation will start from 0, go to 100 and call it a day. But in this case, we want to loop it over, and we have a very appropriately named looping method as well. So if I select the same, now our animation will loop. That is, if I hit play, it will keep on looping. So it goes to 100 from 0 to 100 and then goes back to 0 and keeps doing that in a cycle. Now in this case, we have a abrupt jump. You can see as soon as it goes to the end, we get that swap, which we don't want. We want a smooth animation. So we can simply go ahead and move this to the center like this. So we go from 0 to -100 for the first half of the animation, and at the end we can simply go back to this animation. So how loop works is we go from 0 to 100 and then back to 0. So we can simply duplicate the states, and in between we have our animation. So I can go ahead and copy this animation by hitting Ctrl C on my keyboard and moving my playhead to the desired area where I want that keyframe, and hitting Control and V to paste the same. So the copy paste works for keyframes in Rive as well. Make sure the same layer is selected. Now, if I play back the animation, you can see what we have. So that's looking pretty good. Now, if you want to add some easing to the animation, that is, if I go ahead and select this keyframe, notice how we have this interpolation tab in the right. So this is kind of the inspector for the keyframes in the animation panel. If I zoom onto the same, you can see we have interpolation and different modes for the same. Right now it is linear, so it is not very fun to look at. For this animation, it's not that obvious, but if I have some other animation, say the hover, so for demonstration, I'll quickly copy these, paste it here, play back the animation. You can see we have a very normal looking animation. I can influence the same by changing the gap between the keyframes. That is, let's say put them halfway through, so the animation will be faster, but not quite what I want. To change the animation, the feel of the animation, we need to add easing to the same. So when I select this keyframe, go to the right side, you can see we have these interpolation options. And in this case, we want a cubic interpolation. Now, I'm not going to go too detailed into what this is doing, but to give a very short answer to what interpolation is it is changing how the animation is interpolated between the 0 to 100% mark. That is, instead of going one by one to the end value, it will ramp up at the start. That is, it will start slow, go crazy in the middle, and start or slow down in the end as well. So if I play back the animation now, did a very crappy job explaining what easing is, but it goes and starts slowly, goes fast in the middle, and then slows down again. And this will be evident if I animate a circle or something. So let's quickly add that. And to all my friends who are not animators, this will be a new concept. That's why I'm stressing on the same. So if I take the same, change the color, please. That's very bad. Okay, so if I take this, key in its position, go to the end, and move it to the other side of the screen, we get animation like that. You can see it is very linear. But I can change its feel by simply adding this easing curve. Now notice how we have these dots in between the starting and the ending position. And if I add the easing curve, you will notice those dots are now more in the starting and the ending position. If I zoom onto that, you can see the dots are denser in the starting position and the ending position. And to make it more evident, I can make it a drastic easing curve like this. You can see how the dots are moving more towards the start as I change this handle, that is the bottom handle, and how I affect the dots in the ending position as I move this handle. So the animation goes like the curve literally, which is right here. It starts out slow. I have deselected the keyframes. It starts out slow, goes fast in the middle, and then comes to a stop very slowly as well. Now on to the animation itself and let it do the job. You can see that looks cool. So even if you have not understood what I have explained about easing and so on, to just get a cool looking animation, we use easing, period, I guess. So let's remove the example we created and get back to our animation. So to this spinning animation, we can add a bit of easing as well to give it another dimension or depth. I will go ahead and simply switch it from the linear to cubic like this and get animation like this. So before we had something like this, And now we have something like this. Looks good to me. So now that is the loading animation. The next is a bit complicated. That is, we have sequence of animations. So let's refer back to our example. That is, we have the success animation. So the icon goes from like big to something like this. So the strokes animate. So we'll cover that as well. So first of all, it disappears, the strokes that is, and then the success label comes in, the tick mark becomes checked, it goes out, and then our default label comes back, and the icon does a jump from the center to the default position. So let's go ahead and perform the same. This looks like a more full animation to me. So let's go ahead and do just that. Again, I'll go ahead and create a new timeline, put it below the state machine, name it, in this case, paid, and then start the animation. So the paid animation will start from this state, that is from the loading. So I'll go ahead and simply copy this keyframes by hitting Control and C or Command C in my keyboard, going to the paid, and Command V or Control V to paste the same. And now I'll go ahead and disappear or make this icon disappear with the strokes. That is, we have this icon made up of strokes, and we saw that as well when we affected the transform property on the stroke. To make it disappear, that is the stroke to draw out in this case instead of in, I can set the stroke to a trim path. That is, change this to a trim path by selecting on the trim option. You can see the stroke becomes invisible here, and instead we get these options, that is start, end, and offset. In this case, we can simply have the stroke draw from 0 to 100%, and to do that, and simply change this end from 0 to 100% like this. So by default, it should be visible. So I can just enter that and then do the same thing for the others. So we have 3 total shapes. Now instead of applying that to each one by one, I can just have all of the paths, that is the literal vertices and lines, inside one shape layer. Now in Rive, we have shape layers and path layers. Let's quickly see what the difference is. So if I have a rectangle, let's say this right here, so I can go to the rectangle tool in from the toolbar. So we have this pen tools. Instead of that, we have a rectangle, which we have not touched yet, but it can be used to create basic rectangles. When I do that, I have something like this, and our interest is in the hierarchy. So we have this rectangle, which can be called a shape layer. Inside of that, we have a path layer, which is visible after we click on this expand button. Like this, we have this path. The path essentially contains the information of the points. So if I go inside the same and allow for this time, because we don't want to get back, you can see what we have. We have these points which we can influence to change the overall shape. So for now, what you can understand is, or what you can pick up is, we have a shape layer which contains all the fill options, that is colors, strokes, clipping effects, and all the other effects. And inside of that, we have a dedicated path layer which can contain the details or the information about the points. Now, what's cool is we can have multiple paths inside of a shape layer. So I can simply go ahead and duplicate this by going ahead and copying it and pasting inside the same. So I can go ahead and hit Control and V on the keyboard, and you can see we have path to a duplicate, and I can go ahead and simply select the same, and if I move it, you can see we get something like this, more of a union operation. So we have one path layer or shape layer, my bad, a shape layer that consists of the fills and all the other effects, and that is applied to all the path layers if there are more than one, like this. Let's get back to our icon. So we want have that stroke trim effect applied to all of the three, not one by one, which we can totally do, but why do that when we can do that all together at once? So I'll go ahead and expand all of these shape layers, select the path layers one by one, and put it to say the top shape layer, like this. Now visually nothing will change, but when I go ahead and try to apply the trim path effects again to this custom shape layer, going over at the trim path options, let's get that here, adding the trim option, and you can see the whole icon is affected, and I can affect that like this. Now there's another property as well, that is right now it goes one by one. So first the middle line, then the S, if you will, and then the circle. If I want all of them to be together, which I want in this case, I can change the trim path setting from sequential to, instead of one by one, to synced, that is together, like this. So let's go ahead and use that in our animation. And just like the properties in the inspector, we can animate this end property as well in the animate mode. So to the animate mode and our success animation, I'll go ahead, key in the end value like this, go let's say 20 frames ahead, and set the end to 0 by entering the number like this, and we get the disappearing animation. Cool. Now we'll go ahead and do the part of the success label, which right now is setting somewhere here. You can see I'll go ahead and select it from the hierarchy. You can see success label, another good point for naming the labels or layers. So I'll go ahead and animate it up. To do that, I will be keyframing the position. So I'll go ahead and key in the position, that is X and Y. X is not needed, that is horizontal movement, but I'll do it anyways. And then move a bit in the timeline. So let's say from 20 to 40th frame, and then again move this to the center, and instead of eyeballing the same, I'll simply hit the vertically center, the same like this. Cool. So we have got the first sequence done. The second sequence is having the speed slide up and this tick icon to draw in. So instead of the stroke going out, we want it in. And for that, just for this, I'll go ahead and select the success label to which the clip effect is applied. And to disable the same for now, because we want to view the same, I'll go ahead and just hide the same by clicking on this eye icon. That is turning the visibility on and off. And because I have that applied to the parent group as well, I have to do the same thing. So it's now visible. So this clip layer is actually like a redundant thing because I have that applied to the top layer. So we have the button content, which encloses or contains all the button content. We have the default label and the success label in their separate groups. So I'll select the success label, remove the clip by clicking this minus icon and having only one clip layer like this. Just a simple sorting out. So now I can go ahead and select this icon, and the same thing which we did with the dollar icon. I will go ahead, enable the settings, and then enable trim path options and have it draw out like this. Now you can see this is not quite the direction we want. That is, a tick goes like this, not from the top to the left. So I can go ahead and use this start as well. Start as well. That is, if I have the start at 100 and the end at 100 as well, you can see we still get what we had before. But now if I decrease the end value, it can go in the other direction which we just want. So let's use that. In the animate mode, when the page is fully animated in the label, that is, I'll select the tick icon which is invisible right now, key in the end property, that is 100, again move 20 frames ahead and set it to 0, which will make it visible like this. Now what you will notice is we have run out of animation length. That is, how do we go after this? Well, that's again a very simple thing. When we create animation, by default, it is of 1 second long. If we want to increase the length, you can simply come here. You can see 1 second written right here. Click on that. It gives us a dialog where we can set different things. So right now, the current playhead's position is 1 second. That is at the end. I can bring it to the front by setting it to 0. Comes forward here, that is. And then we can increase the duration, say to 3 seconds. Now we have other options as well, that is the playback speed. So if we have created animation but we don't like how fast or slow it is, we can either increase the speed or decrease it as well. So you don't have to actually redo your animation or move the keyframes around. You can simply change the speed. Same goes for the FPS. So if you want more of a static looking animation, you can do that from here. Most of the time, you will have all of them set to the default values. Only the duration, you'll be setting it according to your need. So we have got the paid label into the view. Now, if I want all of the keyframes squished in this viewable area, you can see we have this bar kind of thing, and either end, if you hover over them, you get this cursor which you can use to scale the timeline itself. So instead of fitting only a second into the viewable area, I can just scroll this or click and drag it to the end to have the 3 seconds into the view. You can see how it affects the scale. So 1 second, how it was before, but if I just drag it all the way to the end, we have got the whole timeline, that is 3 seconds into the view. Cool. So we'll go ahead and animate it out. Slide the label in, get the tick mark, and then we'll wait a few moments. That is, let the user actually see the paid label. Let's say for 20 frames more, and then animate it out. To do that, simply come to the success label, and you can see we have the keyframes right here. So I'll zoom on to that. I'll go ahead and add the current keyframe, that is keyframe with the current position, by clicking on this diamond like this. And yes, you can do that from here as well. That is either the properties keyed in the animations layers or from the inspector. Now go ahead and move the playhead 20 frames ahead. So it is in 20, should be in 40, like that. And then I'll go ahead and move it back out of the view, which is this state here. You can see this right here. So once again, put this back at 40. select this, hit Ctrl C and Ctrl V to copy and paste it to this location. And now we have animated it out. And then we have the last sequence, that is getting this default label back into the view. So you can see we have this text keyed in that is out of the view. And let's say after it is out, I can key it again to create a keyframe, and then 20 frames ahead, let's say at 2 seconds, I'll go ahead and move it back up. Now to get it to the default position, I'll just go to idle, timeline, copy this right here, that is the default position, come to our animation and get it there. You can see there was a difference. So that's how we make sure it is going to be in the same location as before. And finally, we want the icon to come here. Now, because it is not in the view, we can just glitch it back, not glitch, but just switch it back to the original state. To do that, I'll go ahead and come to idle again, have the dollar icon, and to get the position values as well, I will simply go ahead and key them in the designer like this, copy the same and come to the timeline and paste them here. Now you can see we get a interpolation in between. So from these position values, that is from the center, it is going to the left, which we don't want. So I'll go ahead and select these position keyframes, and in the interpolation, or actually the scale as well, beside the linear curve, you will notice we have a hold curve. And as it sounds, it's just gonna go ahead and hold the values until next one comes in. That is for a new keyframe, which is these right here. So you can see it just switch backs to this position like this. In this case, that's what we want. So sometimes you don't want any interpolation in between the keyframes as well. And that's how you do it. Now let's go ahead and get it back. That is for our shape layer. We have animated it out using the stroke, that is trim end. I'll go ahead and simply reverse that. So copy paste the 0%, go 20 frames ahead right here, and then set it back to 100 so it is visible like this. So we have got ourselves the animation like this, and I will enable the clipping back on. Let's play it through. Dollar sign goes out. I can't keep up. So we had a animation like this. Now you will notice that linear behavior which we had before. So just add easing to the same to all the starting keyframe of all the pairs. That is for these two, this is the starting one. Similarly, I'll select all the new ones like this, add easing. And to add a bit more of the spice, I'll go ahead and have the handle a bit closer to the left. So the top handle, pulling it more towards the left, and we have a animation like this. So this is what we had before, like this. And this is the effect applied after the custom curve. I'll just go ahead and type that in. So this value here should be 24. I already know that, so I can simply set the value like this, hit play. So this is more of a snappier motion if you will. If I want to add delay in between any sequence, let's say after this animates out, if I want to add a delay between the label appearing and this icon disappearing, and simply select all the keyframes that come after this sequence and move them away. But I think that's fine in this case, and simply go ahead and have this animation completed. Now we didn't use the whole 3 seconds length, which is just fine. We can leave it as it is. But for the sake of it, let's set it to 2 seconds and 30 frames like this. So come over to the duration options and set it back to 230 like this. And we have got ourselves a timeline like this. Now we are mostly set and ready to jump into the state machine. And I think we are a bit late on the time, so I'll go ahead and try to be as concise as possible. So once we have got all the animations in, we'll go ahead and create the logic, how it goes from one to another with the use of inputs and so on. To create a state machine, we can go ahead and click on the plus icon and create a state machine just like that. But when you create a new file, we already have a state machine added, which you can click and get started in. Inside of a state machine, we get different options. We have inputs, which are like buttons, sliders, or things like that, which we can use to interact with our animation. That is, you can do it here and the developers can do it in the runtime. We have listeners, that is listeners for events like mouse hovers, clicks, and so on. And then we have the work area, the graph, if you will, where we have different states as blocks like this. So right now it is going from entry to hover, that is this state right here, and it is evident by this link in between and the arrows icon, which is pointing towards the hover. So that's how we create transitions or links. And then we have the properties for the selected thing. Like if you select the transition, you have properties for that. If you select the state, you have properties for that. We have a console as well, which just spits out the events and data or information related to same. That is, if there is a change in a state, if there is a trigger, change of a number input, a boolean check uncheck, and so on. For this use case, we don't need the same, so let's hide it away. We're interested in the inputs, listeners, the layer, that is our state machine layer, and the properties of the state machine stuffs. So let's go ahead and create a state machine logic such that we have something like this. Now I'm not going to click on the state machine, but you can see we will be creating something like this where we have this pay now button. We go inside the same, show the loading animation, and when we have the payment done, we do this animation and go back to the idle state. So we have set up the animations. Now we only need to set up the logic. So starting with the different kind of states which we have. So we have this entry state, this exit state, and this any state. You will notice they have special colors. The entry state is green, so like a very friendly thing. So what it means is that entry is if you want to enter inside of a state at the very start, as soon as the play is hit, you can do that like this. Now if we want any other state from the transitions or animations inside our state machine, we can simply click them, let's say paid one, and drag and drop them to the layer like this to have that available. And to make a link with the same, I can simply hover over this state. If I zoom onto the same, you can see there is a dot that appears, which means I can click and drag to get a link like this and put it over any state to create a link. Now hover is already having a link. I can hover over the paid one and it creates a link from the entry to paid like that. Pretty simple. Now you can go ahead and remove this link with the hover by selecting the transition. And to select a link or transition, as we call in Rive, we simply select this middle arrow in between, which also denotes which direction the transition is going. Now, between two states, like the animations we create, we can have back and forth, but between the special states, that is entry, exit, and any state, we can't go to them because they are special states. You can't rewind time. So that's a question I also get. So clarifying that out, you can go from entry to any animation to enter into that animation and play it at the beginning. So I don't want to play the hover one, only the paid one. So I can select this like this and hit delete on my keyboard to delete that link or break that transition. Now if I go ahead and play the state machine by clicking on the button, you can see the paid animation is played. So let's go ahead and build up our animation from the entry state. So first of all, we should go over to the idle state. That is, if nothing is happening, we should be well in the default, that is the idle state. Let me remove the animation we created for demonstration. That is this right here. Let's get the idle like this. Create a link between the same. So hover over the entry, get that dot, click and drag and connect it to idle like this. Now we can go ahead and play and nothing changes visually because we want this behavior, that is the idle behavior. And then we can go ahead and go to the hover state if there is a hover. So I want to make another connection. So hover over the idle. You can see that dot appearing. I can click on that and drag it over to hover. So we have got a link like this. Now if I play the state machine, it instantly goes to hover, which we don't want. We want to go to the hover state only if we have hovered over this button. Now it would be cool if we have some kind of control, let's say a checkbox, which I can say it is hovered or not. So check if hovered, unchecked if not hovered. To do that, we use inputs. So I can go ahead and add input by clicking on the plus icon right here and choose from the types of different inputs we have. We have number inputs, which can be any number from 0 to infinity. We have booleans, which again can be checked or unchecked, and trigger, which simply trigger a action, like just hitting a punch or a click of a button. So I'll go ahead and select boolean. In this case, you can see we get this boolean, which we can check or uncheck to control our animation in turn. Let's give this a name. So double click on the name, and here it would be is hovered like that. Now I'll go ahead and use this as the condition for the transition between the idle and the hover state. So from entry, we go to idle, no sweat, but from idle, we should go to hover only when this thing is checked. And to ensure that, we'll go ahead and click on this transition property right here between idle and hover. And in the properties of that transition, we'll go ahead and go down, and you can see we have conditions panel. We'll go ahead and add a condition for idle to hover. Right now there are no conditions, but we want one. So we'll click on plus, and this gives us a drop down to select one of the inputs. In this case, you can see we have inputs and also artboard. So recently Rive introduced width, height, and the ratio parameters, which you can use to create conditions. Very cool, but in this one we'll only cover inputs. So let's go over that. So I'll select the is hovered input, which I just created. And then you can see a value for the same. So when is hovered is set to true, that is checked, we will go from idle to hover. Let's go ahead and test we have like what we have created so far. So now if I go ahead and start the state machine And now you can see the state machine is waiting in the idle state. If I hover over the button, you can see nothing happens because we have not set the listeners. Made a fool out of myself. So we go to the input, and now if I go ahead and check the same, you can see we go to the hover state. Cool. But if I uncheck the same, well, it does not revert back to idle. And you might have guessed it, we have to set up condition for the same as well. So as we go to the idle to the hover state, we can go back from hover to idle as well. To do that, you just hover over the hover state, no pun intended, and click and drag to get that link and drop it onto the idle. You can see now we get these two arrows. So we go from idle to hover as well and the other way around. So let's select the other one, this right here. And in this one, you can see no conditions. So from hover to idle, no conditions. We will add a condition, select is hovered. And now instead of true, we want the value to be false. So it is unchecked. We go back to the idle state. All right, let's test that. Come to the inputs. Check it. You can see the icon is big. We are inside of the hover state. And if I go ahead and uncheck the same, we go back to the idle state. And that's pretty much it. We created a condition and control the same with this input, which is Boolean input. Now that's cool, but you can see we don't have any animation, or in this case, transition between the states. And that's very easy to set up. At beginning, I had told you that we'll just set up the keyframes for the scale in this case. So the scale is set to 100 here, and in the hover state, it is set to 125. Now we want to create a animation between the same. And in state machine, we call that transition. So from one state to another, we have a transition. And that can be configured in the transition property as well. That is the arrow. So when I select the same, in the left or right, to my right, we have the idle to hover. We can give it a duration for the transition or the animation in between. Right now it is set to 0, but let's give it some. Let's say 200 or 400, so it's evident. And by default, it will be set to 400 milliseconds. And if I go ahead and now try to test the same, check is hovered, you can see we got a animation. Again, to notice it, I'll set it to, let's say, 1000 milliseconds. That would be a second. And test that again. You can see we get a animation. Now we want that happen to be in the other way around as well. So I'll select both. First of all, disable state machine and make a selection by clicking and dragging in this layer like this. So select both. Come over to the panels. Right now it is a dash because selected values are different. So for the idle to hover, we added the transition animation, that is duration. But for the other way around, we did not. That's why we have something like this. Nothing to fear. Just select it and give it a value will be applied to both. So we want something like, let's say, 400 milliseconds. The MS is optional. Select it. Just keeps going up. So we have 400 milliseconds added as the transition between the two. Now if I go ahead and test the same, we have something like this. Cool. We have the animation, but again, it is kind of linear, if you get what I mean. To spice things up, as I mentioned, we add curves to the same. So I can come here, and when I have selected these transitions, we have the transition duration, that is the transitions properties, the conditions. Yes, you can edit them at once as well. And if you scroll down using the scroll wheel, you can see we have this interpolation. So for the interpolation, we want a easing curve, and then we can go ahead and spice things up by moving the handle a bit to the left like this, or I can enter a specific curve as well, which I like to use is 0.2, comma 0, comma 0, comma 1. No need to remember that, but this is what we have. Gives it a very, very snappy feel. Cool. So we have the animation for the hover state. Now let's go ahead and create the different conditions for the states moving forward, which would be the loading state. So let's drag and drop that in here. And to go to the loading state, we'll go ahead and create a new input. So from the hover state, we should go to the loading state when there is a click. So we hover over it, we click it, it should go to loading. So I'll go ahead and create a link from hover to loading like this, add a new input. And in this case, we'll go ahead and add a trigger input, which would be plus trigger like this. Name this on click. And then I can go ahead and use the same. So select the transition, come to the conditions. From the drop down, select the on click input. Now I can go ahead and go to the hover state. And if I click on click, it goes to the loading animation. Now again, you can see there is no transition. To add transition in between, simply select it and increase the duration. And because the loading animation is more prominent, I will have the duration a bit low, which is what I like to do. And now if I go ahead and do the same, you can see we get the label going down and this coming to the center. That's because in the idle one, we had the text position keyed in, and in the loading one, we had this keyed down. So Rive automatically did the transition for us. So you only have to key in the states, one or maybe two. One is mostly fine, and you have the transition in between in the state machine. Next, we will go over to paid. So we'll have another trigger that is a trigger input, which would be on payment done. You can name your triggers with a convention if you want, but in this case I have is hovered, on click, and a payment done is a special one, so it does not start with on or such. The naming is just a convention, as I mentioned, but the main thing is the input itself. So we'll use this to go from loading to paid one. So create a connection in between the same, and then the condition will be on payment done. So if I go ahead and add the transition duration just now like this, and also make sure the curves is an easing curve. Now if I go ahead and click it, and if I go ahead and trigger the payment done input, you can see we get something like this. Going through that again. So when I click it, you can see the icon disappears, payment done label comes up, and we get back our idle state. That is this right here. So to have this in a cycle, we'll just go from the paid back to idle like this. But should we have any transition duration in between? Well, let's see what happens when I leave it as it is. On click, and if I signal payment done, you will notice it just kind of glitches to the idle state. And that's because we have no conditions, no duration in between. So in this case, what we want is the on paid, that is this timeline to be played at 100%, that is played at all, and then go back to the idle state. To do that, we have a special property in the transitions that is exit time. As the name suggests, it will allow you to specify some exit time to go from the current state to another one if there are no conditions or nothing at all. Even if there are, the exit time will be respected if you specify the same. By default, it is enabled, but we can go ahead and simply check it to enable the same and add the same here. Now, this is a time thing. So instead of going to your specific timeline, getting the duration, and if you change the same in the future, everything breaks. So here what we can do is use percent values. So select the transition, enable exit time, and use 100%. So play 100% of the animation, and then you can go from paid to idle. Let's test that out. So we have the hover, we click, loading animation playing. If I go ahead and signal payment done, it plays the paid animation at all and then goes to the idle animation, and to hover in this case because we left this checked. So the next thing for our state machine is to hook all of this with the actual cursor events, that is mouse hovering, clicking, and so on. That's pretty easy as well with listeners. So in the listener, we can go ahead and add a listener by clicking on the plus icon like this, which just adds a listener. And then when we select the listener, we have the properties on the right side. First of all, let's give this a name. So first of all, we want hover in on the button like this. And then it says select a target. When I select that, we get this border around. So we are selecting a target. So any object which I click will be the target, which will be used for the hover events. In this case, we want this container or rectangle. So I'll select it, and you can see the same is used. If I click on this hover in again, you can see we have the container as the target. Now we get the options to set the events which we want to listen for. In this case, it would be pointer enter, which is the default one. So when the pointer, which denotes to our cursor, enters the rectangle or container, we'll go ahead and perform an action. You can perform multiple actions, which you can do by clicking on this plus icon. You can change your input, align a target, report an event. Now these are new things, but in this case we want to set an input which is already added. So select the input we want to set is hovered to true when the pointer enters this container. Let's try that out. By default, let's uncheck the same. Now if I hover over the container, you can see is hovered is checked. But if I hover out, that is not set up. So we have to set that up as well. So I'll go ahead and simply duplicate this. To do that, right click on the same, hit duplicate, and rename it to hover out like that. Come to the right panel, change the event from pointer enter to pointer exit. The input will be the same. The value will be set to false instead. So when the pointer enters, it is checked. Pointer exits, it is unchecked. Let's test the same. So if I hover in, hover out, hover in, hover out, works as expected. Now I'll go ahead and add the click listener as well. So I'll go ahead and select the container. And if we have anything selected in our hierarchy or the stage, and then if we add a listener, it will be used as the target by default. So I have the container selected, click on add a listener. You can see the container is already used as a container. So that's a tip. Here I'll say click, and you might have guessed it, in the pointer events, we have click listener, set the event. And in this case, we want to trigger the on click trigger input. So simply select that from the drop down like this. And we have everything set up with our mouse events. Let's test that out. So I hover in, it works. I click on it, it goes to the loading state. And now if I go ahead and signal the payment done, now this is not synced up with listeners because this is something done from the backend, the developers, that is. We get to the success animation and end everything and go back to the idle state. And again, it will work everything from how it did just now. And that's pretty much it. It took a lot of time to just get started because we did it for the first time, but we actually built something that is interactive and controlled by us. That is using these inputs. Now, as you can see, we are doing this here in the editor as a preview. The same controls are available for the developers for the apps and websites, which they can use to simply trigger the inputs or click or uncheck the same as we did in the editor. And yeah, that's basically it.
Hi, Rahul. So that was absolutely lovely. Thank you for walking us through the entire process of it. How was it for you? Do you want water? You've been speaking for a very long time.
Yeah, I would like to apologize. I don't actually do very long sessions like this, and even if I am, like it's one on one, so I do
Yeah.
get some kind of breathing room in between. So, very sorry for everyone listening to the same. Maybe a bit of a not so good experience in betweens, but yeah,
But I
hopefully
feel like this
everybody
was
liked the
very
same.
necessary. The first time that you get into something, you really need to sit and go on about it on a stretch in order to genuinely understand, what the concepts are and to cover the basics. So to get started and, for that to be a very concentrated session is, I think, very important. I think you will be able to resonate with that as well.
Truly, truly.
Yeah.
I will share this with the viewers. That is, we had this planned within 40 minutes at max, but it took more than an hour, like touching an hour. So I
Yeah.
made sure like the vital things are not skipped. So not some
Definitely.
like someone can't say like, hey, you skipped that. We don't understand it. I made sure to at least give a high level understanding, if not the deepest level of understanding, so that someone can follow along.
That's also very important because in a lot of tutorials that we see, it's do this, do this, do this, but to be able to understand what the concept is, what the principles are behind all of those things is actually what makes us understand, okay, if I were to go about it in a different context, how would I do that? So I genuinely believe that's very important. So thank you for taking that time out and actually making us understand just how all of it works and the principles and the concepts behind it, especially easing. It's something that I still struggle with. So thank you so much for that. I just had a couple of questions on my own, and then we can open the Q&A. So the first question that I had was, when you're starting out Rive or any animation software, what are some common mistakes that we can avoid as beginners?
I think the most like the basic thing which when getting started is the fear of all those new features which you're not familiar of. You think like this is also necessary, this is also necessary, and you move on quite like fast. Like
Hmm.
in Rive, I think someone should give a few like minutes or in their time of schedule, they should give time to the design mode and the animate mode before going into the state machine. Again, it is cool
Hmm.
seeing all those interactions coming alive, but if you give the basic time to the designer and the animate mode, learn there at least the basics, you will
Hmm.
have the very good foundation to move on to the
Yeah.
state machine.
Yeah. Makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. And we have a couple of questions from the chat that I wanted to address as well. How do you decide where to use Lottie versus where to use Rive in a product?
Well, I used Lottie myself as well in my websites. I would say Rive is like, as you saw, you can do everything within the editor, so no need for code. So, for a person who is doing it for himself, let's say they
Hmm.
have the animation in After Effects already done, so no need to do it again in Rive. Just use that as Lottie.
Hmm.
But let's say you want to add some kind of interaction to the same, like let's say basic hover states, click states, you
Yeah.
can import it in Rive and use it as a Rive animation.
Hmm. Makes sense. Got it. Got it. And another question was, After Effects is pretty advanced as well. Do you think companies will prefer Rive in coming days?
I really think as a like Rive instructor myself, like more and more people are switching towards
Hmm.
it. Like I think I should motivate everyone to at least consider Rive as well. Like There was a poll recently, I won't share the source, but a lot of people are like hesitant to get started with Rive because it's a new technology, and that's totally understandable. Like
Yeah.
people are hesitant, like, yeah, it's cool and all, but the learning curve is a bit like not steep, but there is the learning curve. So it's a bit hard to get started. So I would say take it slow, like take 1 or 2 hours to just watch a few videos from YouTube. Just get started, and as you go, just do some like projects, let's say icon animation. Start with simple things, and
Yeah.
as you go further, you will discover the more like harder features and understand them instead of just going over all of them at once.
And I think it's also the same for each and everything that we pick up. At the beginning, you don't really know a lot. You don't know the basics and how all of those things work. But there's a learning curve that's applied to each and everything that you pick up. So,
Surely.
I feel like people really need to sit down, like have that time with yourself in order to be, to reach a level where you start feeling comfortable with the software. And after a point, you're just doing it, completely at muscle memory. So I think that's really great.
That's like the base thing, like learning anything, as you mentioned. Like
Yeah,
learning
yeah,
anything requires practice,
yeah,
more like time dedication.
yeah. So the last question that I have for you is, how do Rive animations handle differences in rendering on various platforms? And how do you adjust designs for consistency?
Like if this was a session held 2 or 3 months like back, I had it would be tough to answer that. But right now, Rive is actually like totally independent of any runtime, if you will. Like any animation, let's say if you're doing or shipping it for a mobile app, a website, let's say a game even, it will look exactly the same in all of them. In terms of responsiveness, which is something like obviously like overlooked,
Hmm.
is Rive recently introduced layouts which you can use too. Like let's say in a mobile it is a small space, so you can like definitely change the animation based on that in
Yeah,
the state machine. Like if you
very
remember when
interesting.
we had that input selection, we had the artboard's width as option as well.
Mm-hmm.
So just giving an example, you can say if the width of the available canvas or drawing surface is less than 300, maybe you can left some things out, or in this case for the button, shrink the size. Or if you have more room, you can shrink it bigger. And even set
Hmm.
conditions like, yeah, it won't go higher than this, even if you have more height or more width available.
All right. And lastly, just from my side, if you have any tips for, because a lot of our viewers today were introduced to Rive for the first time, they had a great look at what the entire platform looks like and how to interact with it. Would you have any tips for beginners who are just going to, I think, start from today, l- learning Rive and everything?
A very basic tip for anybody learning Rive, like I did as well, is you don't see it as a new thing, but you should
Hmm.
connect it with the things you already have done. Like if you are a designer, you should look at it as a Figma, but an extension of animation and state machine. If you're coming from After Effects, you see the state machine as a new addition. And just try to learn and connect the things which you already know. It will be very easy that way.
I think that's actually very helpful, because when you start looking at things in a standalone way, it becomes pretty scary. But if you start attaching just tiny elements of what you know to just introducing a something new, I think that transition is also very helpful. Lovely,
Yes.
lovely. Yes. Okay. So thank you so much, Rahul, for doing this session with us. To everybody, thank you for attending this session. We really loved having you here. And for more such sessions, we keep doing them every week. So I would love for all of you guys to keep coming to our streams and watching them. Please follow After Office Hours. Please follow YouTube channel of Rahul. It's called Motion Magic. And I
See you
am,
there.
yeah, yeah, you're going to see me there. So very, very excited for all of you guys here. Thank you so much. And I'm going to keep seeing you for all the next sections that we have.